right, the goal tonight is to have a look at learning how to be effective comforters, because Job's friends certainly failed in that regard, and one of the things we'll look at is what went wrong as they attempted to comfort him. I will start out, though, telling you a couple things about the overall plan here. The book of Job is a tough one for the translators. It's a really tough one to translate, and you'll find in various translations some really different translations of the same Hebrew. And so what I attempted to do was, I am convinced that there is a consistent theme running through the book, like Ecclesiastes, and that's another tough one to translate. So what I have done is I have gone to various translations and tried to find the ones that fit the context the best and also supported by the Hebrew. So that was what I attempted to do as we go through this. You'll see I jump around from one version versus another, although normally I'm using the New King James. I will remind you that if I go too fast for the note takers, don't worry about it. You can get on christadelphianbibletalks.com and you can download either the PowerPoints or the PDF files, or you can listen to the classes I gave in North Battleford on this. So don't worry about it if you miss something. Now, the goal tonight is to look at the strategies of Job's friends and what went wrong. So I'll tell you up front, when you start looking at Eliphaz, you're going to find out that his basic position is that God is so high and pure and everybody else is wicked, and he doesn't even trust his angels. This is how Eliphaz saw God. He had this relationship with God where God was way out there, so distant from him, and God didn't trust anybody. He wouldn't trust his angels, and he really is. So it's no surprise to him the way he treats people. He bases his doctrine on inspiration of all things. You're going to see tonight he claims to be inspired, and also the wisdom of the elders, as he keeps telling Job about. He has the wisdom of the elders on his side. In round two, you're going to notice that he goes really hard on this idea that God will punish the wicked in this life, at which he is implying, Job, that's you. And finally, in round three, when Job doesn't come around to agree with him, he just turns to personal accusations and just gets very nasty about things he says about Job. Bildad, he's got a different strategy, but he still buys into this same basic framework, but he comes at it from a different perspective. He's going to claim that Job and his children are wicked right from the beginning, and he's going to appeal to his interpretation, at least, of how God treated the wicked in the past. So he looks back and says, well, look at it. Here's how God treats the wicked, and now that's you, Job. So he thinks that Job's present situation is going to prove that Job is a great sinner. In round two, he's going to come through and shows how God just punishes and destroys the wicked. This is the God that we believe in and we worship. He just has this relationship where he's looking at you to see what you do wrong, and when you do something wrong, whoa, he goes after you and you get punished in accordance with what you did. And again, in round three, he sees God as being so high and righteous that God must be right. Job, you can't possibly be right in this, and that Job, you're just a worm in God's sight. That's what he refers to him as. And Zophar, on the other hand, Zophar's got a whole different strategy. Out of the three guys, I think Zophar would have been my least favorite, but he just tells Job, quit complaining, Job. God's punishing you less than you deserve. So let's face it, you really deserve worse than this, but for all the things that have happened to Job, it's like, Job, you really should have gotten it worse. God knows all your faults, and God destroys the wicked man, and that's you, Job. And then in round two, he just switches right away to personal accusations. And by that point, he's gone so far down this pathway, there is no round three for Zophar. I don't really think he had anything left to say. The sad part that I want all of us to realize tonight, that what we can take from this, what's really sad, is that for all of Job's reasoning with them, and for everything that Job is learning as he's going through this, because God, in bringing Job through this experience, he's forcing Job to realize that his previous ideas are wrong. And that Job is now looking for answers, and he's trying to learn, and he's pointing out things that he's never noticed before. But when he brings these things up, his three friends, they won't even consider what he's saying. They're not even hardly listening. All they're doing is formulating the responses. And I think there's a great lesson for all of us in dealing with people and having discussions, that we should at least listen to somebody and try to evaluate what they have to say. So round one is all the general statements that we got about the wicked, and what they're going to do. All three of them basically counsel Job with the same counsel in the end, is Job, just repent of your nasty sin, whatever you did wrong, and God will bless you again. So look at in Job 4, we'll start there. You got Eliphaz the Temanite. He's going to now speak up. So far, the three friends have just sat there in silence for a week. Job had his things to say in chapter 3, wished he had died. And now Eliphaz is going to answer, and he's going to finally open his mouth, and really, he never should have. So he says, if one ventures a word with you, will you be impatient? Yet who can keep from speaking? Behold, you have instructed many, and you have strengthened the weak hands. Your words have upheld him who was stumbling, and you have made firm the feeble knees. So he looks back at how Job had been a very effective counselor. Job had helped many people. And basically, he just says, Job, now it's your turn. And look what happens. You're impatient. You just you can't deal with this, Job. And isn't your fear of God, your confidence, and the integrity of your ways, your hope? And that's the way he starts. So he goes on and he says, remember in verse 7, who that was innocent ever perished? Come on, Job, think about this. Did the innocent ever perish? Or where were the upright cut off? Now, you can think in the Bible of cases that they should have known about where innocent people did perish. You know, like Abel. Abel was killed in this case. And so I really think that, you know, this part of this argument could have easily fallen apart from the beginning if they had been open to thinking. But he says in verse 8, he says, as I have seen, because he's looking at life through his blinders that he's got. He only sees his way. Those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. But notice, this is not just random. It's verse 9, by the breath of God they perish, and by the blast of his anger they are consumed. So these people really believe God was involved in their life, but involved in a very negative way. God was just watching, looking at everything you did today and finding out, like, what did you do wrong? And I'll punish you for those things. And it's a terrible, nasty relationship that they had with God. So you find in chapter 4, here's what Eliphaz says about his support for his views. Verse 12, a word was secretly brought to me, and my ear received a whisper of it. In disquieting thoughts from the visions of the night, when deep sleep falls on men, fear came upon me and trembling, which made all my bones shake. Then a spirit passed before my face. The hair on my body stood up. It stood still, but I could not discern its appearance. A form was before my eyes, and then there was silence. And then I heard a voice saying. So he's going to claim that what he is bringing to this discussion is based on inspiration from a spirit. And here's what the Spirit said to him, supposedly. Can a mortal man be more righteous than God? Can a man be more pure than his maker? Now that sounds fairly reasonable, right? You know, you start out thinking, well, this is pretty good. But then in verse 18, if he puts no trust in his servants, that's his heavenly servants, if he charges his angels with error, which is going to come up again in chapter 15, how much more those who dwell in houses of clay, whose foundation is in the dust, who are crushed like a moth. So he sees God as being so far away from us and so high and mighty and righteous that really he can hardly even identify with mortal people and even angels because he doesn't even trust them. That's the relationship Eliphaz has with God. So look what he says in chapter 5. Eliphaz comes out and says, call out now. Is there anyone who will answer to you? And to which of the holy ones, which of the angels will you turn? For wrath kills a foolish man, and envy slays a simple one. But here's Eliphaz saying, I have seen the foolish taking root. But suddenly, look at this. I cursed his dwelling. His sons are far from safety. They're crushed in the gate. There's no deliverer, because the hungry eat up his harvest, taking it even from the thorns, and the snare snatches their substance. For affliction does not come from the dust, nor does trouble spring from the ground. In other words, Job, this isn't random. You're being punished. And God is involved in this, and people have cursed you, and now you're seeing the results of this. So some of the expositors, the translators all pretty much all say in verse 3, but suddenly I cursed his dwelling, because they say that's what the Hebrew says. But some of the expositors are a bit taken by that, and they're thinking, like, can people really do that? Would a person really think that they could curse another person like that? And now what's happened to Job is the result of people cursing him for his wickedness. But if you ever talked to any of the Muslims, they certainly still believe this. And if you think back They call it hot eyes, by the way. They say people look at you with hot eyes, and when they look at you with the hot eyes, then that way God will curse those people, and they'll end up suffering some kind of nasty thing. But when you think back in the history of even Christianity, look at how often people called on God and cursed other people because they really thought that in some way that was going to impact what God would do to those people. And this is where Eliphaz is coming from. This is the kind of view that he has. And I think that where this comes from, brothers and sisters, the warning for us is that when we become fixed on judging other people, if that's our basic operandus every day, that we're looking at things that go wrong in somebody's life and we're judging them, it can lead to things like this, where you think that you can bring curses on people, or you can think nasty things, and then maybe God will do those things on those people that we consider to be the wicked. And Eliphaz fell into this poor category. So what we need to do is look at, how do you become an effective comforter for somebody else? And if we're normally focused on judging other people, that's what we do a lot of. If we look at other people and we go to meeting and we go to Bible class and we just look around and we go home with a lot of negative thoughts about what we think people are doing wrong, we won't become effective comforters, because we're always going to find a reason why they're experiencing suffering. And our minds are going to blame, we're going to blame them. And this is what we do as people. If that's our basic strategy of looking around at people when bad things happen, you really can't be an effective comforter if you are convinced deep down inside your own head that, well, they really brought this on themselves. They really deserve this. They must have done something, that God's done this to them. It's very difficult to be an effective comforter for that person, because the people, they read that. They figured it out. So he gives his strategy then, Eliphaz does. He says, look in chapter 5 and verse 8, as for me, I would seek God, and to God I would commit my cause. And to him that means by just acknowledge all your sins that you committed, Job. And God does these great things, unsearchable and marvelous things without number. And so in verse 17, happy is the man whom God corrects. Therefore, do not despise the chastening of the Almighty. Now, that sounds a lot like Proverbs 3 and verse 11, and that gets quoted in Hebrews chapter 12. You might think, well, how in the world does this happen? How would anybody quote Eliphaz and make any good things out of this? But the problem is that Eliphaz is using somewhat correct concepts, but he's applying them in the wrong way. He's saying this in the sense, don't despise the chastening of the Almighty, because in verse 18, he bruises, and to him, that's punishment. He's punishing you, Job, but he'll bind you up as soon as you confess your sins. And he wounds, but his hands make whole. And so this is the relationship that he has with God. It's a very fear-driven relationship that I've got to do what's right today, because if I don't, then God is going to punish me for all these things that I do wrong. And I don't want to have to suffer those punishments. And the sad thing is that Eliphaz is applying these words to Job, and they don't apply at all in this case. So what you find with Eliphaz and even Bildad and Zophar sometimes is a mixture of truth and error. So you have to be careful quoting from the book of Job, because in some ways these guys are off the mark, and you really don't want to be quoting their ideas as gospel truth. So you look at Job 5 verse 17, happy is the man whom God corrects, therefore do not despise the chastening of the Almighty. See, Eliphaz says this from the perspective that God is punishing you. Whereas when you look at Hebrews 12 that quotes Proverbs 3, look how Paul uses this in Hebrews 12 and verse 5. He says, and have you forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as sons? So Paul's trying to bring out this relationship that God's our Father, and we are his children, we're his sons. And he says, and he quotes from Proverbs 3, my son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. But look what Paul puts in here, because this is out of the Proverbs, for whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son he receives. See, God's perspective in this is all from love. It's driven by the fact that he loves us, he cares about us, and he wants us to be in his family. It's not a fear-driven relationship at all, but it's one that's based on love. And that's where you got to be careful reading the perspective of Eliphaz and Zophar and Bildad, is they're all operating out of this idea of fear. and they don't seem to have a loving relationship with God at all. And that's why in the end, when you get to chapter 42, God asks Job to pray for them because they have not spoken of me what is right. They've misrepresented God in this whole conversation. So Job answers in chapter 6. Here's his first answer. Here's the first answer he's going to give to in relation to Eliphaz's speech. He says, look, oh, in verse 2, that my grief were fully weighed and my calamity laid with it on the scales. For then it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words have been rash. For the arrows of the Almighty are within me. My spirit drinks in their poison. The terrors of God are arrayed against me. Now, you see how Job is also coming from this perspective that God is out to get him? The arrows of the Almighty are in him, and the terrors of God are arrayed against me. So in verse 5, he says, look, does the wild donkey bray when it has grass, or does the ox low over its fodder? Because even the animals, they don't complain when they're taken care of. The only reason I'm complaining is because of look at what God has done to me. So in verse 8, he says, look, oh, that my request, that God would grant me the thing I long for, that it would please God to crush me, and that he would loose his hand and cut me off. Because back in chapter 3, that had been his wish. He wished he had never been born, never been conceived, and finally now wished that he could just die. Because there's no hope. Nobody's providing him with any hope in this case, and he just wants to die. That's the result of ineffective counseling. He goes on that a despairing man in verse 14 should have the devotion of his friends, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. But my brothers are as undependable as intermittent streams, as the streams that overflow. They're destructive. You folks, you're not helping me. You're destructive to me. You're destroying me. You're giving me no hope at all, and all you're doing is blaming me for all this. So in verse 21, now you too have proved to be of no help. You see my calamity and are afraid. You wonder whether they were afraid that, well, if they got too close to Job and connected with him, that God would punish them too. And have I said, make me a gift, or from your wealth offer a bribe for me, or deliver me from the adversary's hand, or redeem me from the hand of the ruthless? In other words, have I asked you to do any extreme things? No. All I'm asking for is for help to understand why this has come upon me. And they could not provide any comforting for this. So what we learn about from this is to be effective comforters, we have to learn to listen to understand the needs of those suffering. Not just listen to what they're saying, but we have to try to understand what they're going through. Otherwise, we never catch their perspective and we're not an effective comforter. We have to try to relieve some of the suffering. That's what Job was looking for, and bring some confidence that with God's help you can get through this, other than blame. You know, the three friends come in and say, sure, you're going to get through this, Job, as soon as you confess your sins and admit what you did wrong. And that's Job's just saying, wait a minute, this is not right. We can't be afraid to get involved. That's one of the things that happens when you get involved in ecclesial life with people, even if it's going to cost you emotionally, financially, and even ecclesially, because some people aren't going to agree with what you're doing when you try to help people. And we can't think that we're better than the one that's suffering. That's one of the things that comes up in Galatians 6. So you don't want to think you're better. We're just there to help. We're there to listen and to try to help people get through their troubles. And whatever we do, don't use it as a time to preach and correct what we think are spiritual weaknesses in the person. They are going to see right through that and not want to hear from us anymore. It's not a time to do that. So, you know, it's easy to stand back in ecclesial life and family life and just judge people or try to preach to them, but that's not an effective way in helping them when they're going through real suffering and grief. So Job's desperation comes out at this point, and in chapter 7 he says, therefore I will not restrain my mouth, but I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. I loathe my life. I would not live forever. Let me alone, for my days are but a breath. And what is man that you should exalt him, and that you should set your heart on him, that you should visit him every morning and test him every moment? See how this relationship that they had with God, they saw God as just like watching what you do, just so that he could find out what you did wrong, and he's testing you all the time, so that when you fail, he can then come after you and punish you for what you did wrong. How long, in verse 19, will you not look away from me and let me alone till I swallow my saliva? Have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target so that I am a burden to myself? See, look at how he views the relationship with God. He sees God as like got an arrow pulled back, and he's aiming it at Job, and he's trying to destroy Job. That's the kind of relationship Job currently has with God. And it's not what he's going to have in the end when he's all done and he says, wow, now my eye finally sees you, because I'd only heard of you by the hearing of the ear. For now I will lie down in the dust, and you will seek me diligently, but I will no longer be. One of the things that you want to watch as you're going through the story of Job is how he's learning about resurrection from the dead. He starts out at the very beginning not realizing how important resurrection from the dead is. But as he goes on, he puts more and more of his trust in the fact that there would have to be a resurrection of the dead. And he spends more time talking about it as this whole procedure goes on. So now Bildad comes in. He listened to that part of Job, and here's Bildad. He's ready to give his answer, all right? How long will you speak these things, and the words of your mouth be like a strong wind? Does God subvert judgment, or does the Almighty pervert justice? If your sons have sinned against him, he's cast them away for their transgression. If you would earnestly seek God and make your supplication to the Almighty, if you were pure and upright, surely now he would awake for you and prosper your rightful dwelling place. Though your beginning was small, yet your latter end would increase abundantly. See how this idea flows that, yeah, your sons, the reason your whole family got wiped out is because they were sinners, and now God's cast them away. And you, Job, you're still alive. So look, what you got to do is earnestly seek God and pray to God. And if you're pure and you're upright, everything's going to turn out okay. And you can see how Job's listening to this, realizing there's something wrong with this. This isn't me. Something's got to be wrong with the idea. So Bildad goes on and he says, look, let's inquire, please, of the former age and consider the things discovered by their fathers. So his basic argument is from the past. He's got the wisdom of the past behind him. For we were born yesterday and know nothing, because our days on earth are a shadow. Will they not teach you and tell you and utter words from their heart? So look back in the recorded history of things that have been passed down and that we've learned from the past, and see that this you're going to learn from what people have taught us. This is the culture that we currently have, Job, that we've grown up with. Can the papyrus grow up without a marsh? Can the reeds flourish without water? While it's yet green and not cut down, it withers before any other plant. And so are the paths of all who forget God, and the hope of the hypocrite shall perish. So when Bildad's looking through this, he says, look back at the past, Job, and you'll see that in the past, anybody that was a hypocrite, anybody that was a person who gave up on God, anybody connected with the wicked, they get wiped out, cut down, and destroyed. And that's what happens with them. So that's going to be basically Bildad's argument. So he goes on, and in this case here, and Job's friends, they really aren't listening to him at all. He's frustrated by Bildad and Eliphaz so far. So what Job does now is he shifts to thinking, well, what I really need is not to talk to you guys, but I want to talk to God. He's thinking through this idea of arguing his case before God. But he's worried in chapter 9, where he says, look, God's not a man as I am, that I may answer him, and that we should go to court together. This is what he really would like. He'd like to go to court and have somebody listen to both sides, and there should be a mediator between them who has the power to lay his hands on both of us, not just on me, but on God and me, and fix this problem and correct whoever is wrong. So in verse 34, let him take his rod away from me, and do not let the dread of him terrify me, because he's thinking, if I go to argue my case before God, I'm going to be so afraid, I'm going to be so terrified that I wouldn't even want to talk to him. I wouldn't want to speak, because if he took the dread away from me, then I would speak and not fear him. But right now, it is not so with me. Job's going to change as we go along. By the time you get all done at the end of chapter 19 into 20 and 23, Job's then going to feel so confident that he's right. He's ready for his day in court with God. But right now, he starts out a bit afraid. So Zophar comes in now and he says, all right, Job, look it. Basically, Zophar says, you're getting punished less than you deserve, so quit complaining and just get it right. Admit to God what you did wrong, and everything will be okay. So look at Zophar, verse 2, chapter 11. Should a multitude of words go unanswered, and a man full of talk be judged right? Should your babble silence men? When you mock, shall no one blame you or shame you? For you say, my doctrine is pure, and I am clean in God's eyes. Now, Zophar's right to go after this, because Job was wrong about this idea, and Elihu's going to tackle it again in chapter 33. But the way that Zophar tackles it is terrible. Oh, that God would speak and open his lips to you, because this is what they would like. Let God talk to you, and he would tell you the secrets of wisdom, for he is manifold in understanding. And know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves. In other words, Job, get up, quit complaining, get your life back together, admit what you did wrong, and thank God for the fact that he was merciful and gracious in a sense, that he didn't punish you as much as you really should get punished. And Job looks at this as like, wow, these are my comforters. This is not helping me at all. He goes on in chapter 11 that if you would prepare your hearts, in other words, confess your great sin and stretch out your hands towards God. If iniquity were in your hand and you put it far away and would not let wickedness dwell in your tents, then surely you could lift up your face without spot. Yes, you could be steadfast and not fear. See, you won't fear then, Job. All you got to do is admit all these things you did wrong, and then you can talk to God, and you won't be afraid, because you would forget your misery and remember it as waters that have passed, and your life would be brighter than noonday. And though you were dark, you would be like the morning, and you would be secure, because there is hope. Yes, there's plenty of hope, Job. All you got to do is confess all these nasty things you've done and realize that your kids have done them too, and that's why God's brought all of this upon you. But in verse 19, you would also lie down, and no one would make you afraid. Sounds like Isaiah, right? Yes, many would court your favor, but the eyes of the wicked will fail, and they shall not escape. And their hope, loss of life. So you got two choices, Job. You can either stick it out with what you're claiming and be a part of the wicked and lose your life too, or you can confess this major sins that you've done and appeal to God for his mercy. So what happens with Job and his friends is they end up with a doctrinal belief system. I mean, granted, you could say, okay, they might be able to say amen to the BASF, but when you look at their understanding of a relationship with God, they had a view of God that's very similar to people today that have the prosperity gospel. And they looked at this as though if I do really good, God will be happy with me and he's going to give me lots of blessings. And if I don't do good, God is going to punish me and he's going to take away all those blessings. And this has been a very popular belief system amongst Christians, amongst Muslims, amongst Jews. This is pretty common amongst religions of this world. I mean, you look at works-based Judaism was basically like this as well. And what God is going to try to do is drive this out of Job, and so that Job can teach other people about what it means to have a relationship with God. So Job's basic response to the three friends after the 3 rounds right now is going to be, okay, guys, you think that the wicked are punished for all the things that they do wrong in this life? Just open your eyes, talk to people who travel, and listen and watch and realize that view is wrong. It doesn't hold up. It doesn't work. And this is what Job is going to try to get them to understand. So in chapter 12, he comes back in verse 2. You really think you're the only wise people and that when you die, wisdom will die with you? But in my mind, as good as yours. You're not better than I am. Everyone knows all these things you've been saying, that God is great and he will punish the wicked. Sure, we know all that, but I don't fit in that category, folks. And my friends, they all laugh at me when I call on God and expect him to answer me. They laugh at me even though I'm right and innocent. Those who are comfortable don't care that others have trouble. They think it right that those people should have troubles. See, he's explaining how this view plays out in life. When you're comfortable in your life and God has blessed you and life is going well for you, a lot of us don't really care as much as we should that others are having troubles, because we think it's right that those people should have troubles. We think it's right because we're convinced they've done something wrong and that God has just brought something into their life to try to fix them and correct something that's wrong in their life. And Job's looking at all this now and realizing this can't be right. It doesn't apply to me. The tents of robbers are not bothered, and those who make God angry are safe in what God provides by his hand. So this is what he comes back with now. He says, look, guys, I finally realized that when people rob, their tents aren't bothered. God doesn't come after them. And those who make God angry, they're safe. He doesn't come after them either. A lot of the times he doesn't. And what God provides by his hand. This is God's responsibility. He chooses not to go after these people. So ask the animals. Ask the animals, they'll teach you. Or ask the birds of the air, and they will tell you. Speak to the earth, and it will teach you. Or let the fish of the sea tell you. Every one of these knows that the hand of the Lord has done this. So Job's entirely confident that God is the one who's made a decision to not go after the wicked a lot of times, not go after the robbers, not go after these people that are angry. He leaves them in this life, and he doesn't go after them. He doesn't bring punishments on them as they may deserve. That God is really responsible for the prosperity of the wicked. And this bothers Job. This bothered Solomon in Ecclesiastes terribly. He couldn't believe that God would live like this. How could a righteous God let the wicked prosper like this? You'll see that in the Psalms. Some of the Psalms are specifically about that. Why do the wicked prosper? And it's because people don't understand how God is training his children. We've got to get a hold of that. And the book of Job is one of the great places to do it. So you look at Jeremiah, he felt the same way. When Jeremiah was looking at this community and all the destruction that was going to come on them by the Babylonians, he finally said in chapter 12, you're always righteous, O Lord, when I bring a case before you, yet I would speak with you about your justice. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why do all the faithless live at ease? And people start to realize that this prosperity gospel thing is not right. This idea that the wicked are punished and the righteous prosper. But it takes time. It takes time in people's lives to figure this out. So you start looking at the fact that, well, what God's after in us, and the reason he doesn't operate with a prosperity gospel for all of us, brothers and sisters, is because he's after obedience that springs from faith, because we love God. He doesn't want us to just serve him because we fear him and we're afraid of being punished. He's not going to give immortality to people that have that kind of a relationship with him. He's after people who obey him because they believe it's the right way to live, and they love their Father and they want to please him. It's all from the positive side. And although we may start with the negative as younger people when we start out, he is hoping we will develop a relationship over time where we will learn to love him, and that perfect love will finally cast out fear. Because fear, as John said, has to do with punishment. So Job decides, look at you three guys, you're useless. You're not helping me at all. What I really want to do is I want to talk to God. He says in chapter 13, behold, my eye has seen all this, my ear has heard and understood. What you know, I also know. I'm not inferior to you, but I would speak to the Almighty, and I desire to reason with God, because the three friends aren't helping him understand. You, he says, however, you smear me with lies. You're worthless physicians, all of you. If only you would be altogether silent, for that would be your wisdom. You know, it's sad, but I've talked to people, Christadelphian people that are suffering, who have actually said that about Christadelphians. They wish they just wouldn't even call them or talk to them, because the things that they're saying are not helpful, and they don't know how to comfort somebody who's going through problems. So in verse 6, hear now my argument, listen to the plea of my lips. Will you speak wickedly on God's behalf? Will you speak deceitfully for him? Will you show him partiality? This would be by claiming God considers Job a wicked sinner. And will you argue your case for God? Would it turn out well if he examined you? Could you deceive him as you might deceive men? Yeah, see, you can fool people, but you won't be able to fool God. He would surely rebuke you if you secretly showed partiality. Would not his splendor terrify you? And would not the dread of him fall on you? Your maxims are ashes of proverbs, and your defenses are defenses of clay. And this is how frustrated Job has gotten with them. So hold your peace with me, he says in verse 13. Let me speak, then let come on me what may. Why do I take my flesh in my teeth and put my life in my hands? Though he slay me, yet I will trust him. Even so, I will defend my own ways before him. See that this battle that's going on in Job's mind, he hasn't given up on God. He trusts God, but he thinks God doesn't understand. God's got misinformation on this case. Somebody's told him the wrong thing. And so I'm trusting in God's justice. He's going to help me through this. This is where Job is at so far. And even so, I will defend my own ways before him. He also shall be my salvation, because Job keeps coming back to this. He's convinced in the end that once God gets straightened out, God will now tell everybody that Job was right, and he'll clear Job in front of everybody. For a hypocrite could not come before him. Listen carefully to my speech and to my declaration with your ears. See now, I have prepared my case. I know that I shall be vindicated. Who's going to contend with me? If now I hold my tongue, I perish. So I'm going to speak. I've got my case prepared. I'm ready to go to court. I'm going to present my side, and I'm going to show God he's wrong. And in the end, God is going to justify me. And that's where Job has been pushed to. So what he's really would like at this point is he'd like to have a day in court where he sits there, testifies in front of people, and he tells the whole story that he's got and straightens out God, and God will listen to him. And finally, in the end, God will turn around to everybody and say, you know what? Job was right. I goofed on this one, and I made a mistake. And I have wrongly brought these things on Job. And that's what he's hoping for. This is back in chapter 13, though, at this point. So only two things do not do to me, then I would not hide myself from you. Don't withdraw your hand far from me. In other words, don't keep bringing these punishments on me. And number two, let not the dread of you make me afraid. Don't scare me when you come to talk to me. And if you'll do those two things, then call and I will answer. Or let me speak and you respond to me. Look how he's talking to God. Like, I'm going to talk and you respond to me. How many are my iniquities and sins? Make me to know my transgression and my sin. Help me understand what's going on. Why do you hide your face and regard me as your enemy? See, this is what a fear-based religion does with God. When bad things happen, we think of God as our enemy instead of a loving Father who is chastening us and disciplining us for our good so that we can share his holiness. See that, and this is the mistake, as far as like the growth that Job had to go through. For in verse 26, for you write bitter things against me and make me inherit the iniquities of my youth. Now, this bothered Job that he says, you write bitter things against me. Job feels right now that because of what God's done to him, God is testifying to all the world that Job is a terrible sinner. And this really bothers Job that God has misrepresented him to his friends and to everybody else. And then he starts thinking, well, maybe the only justification he could possibly have is that God is making him inherit the iniquities of his youth. Because that's what he's thinking right now. I know I haven't done anything currently right now that would justify all this. So maybe it's something to do with things I did in the past that God is now bringing up at this point in my life. And you see what ends up happening, that these wrong views of God, what they basically do for all of us, brethren and sisters, is they push us away from God when bad things happen. Because if we have a relationship with God that's built on fear and punishment, when bad things happen, we can only understand that an angry God is punishing us or he's punishing other people. And that's how we see it. And we've got to get rid of this idea. This idea is not biblical. It's coming from Christianity. It's coming from Judaism. It's coming from Muslims. It's coming from all these other religions of the world who think that God punishes his children with bad things. And it just doesn't hold up. You think of the New Testament. Go through the whole New Testament and see where that is. And even in the Old Testament, you'll find out that translators have cheated on us when they translated some of these things to present it that way. But that's what a fear-based relationship does when you see God that way. So in chapter 14, he just figures, all right, my only hope right now is to die now, and my hope is resurrection from the dead. God will have to fix this at some point. So now Job's thinking, I'm going to die. But you know what? Verse 13, oh, that you would hide me in the grave, that you would conceal me until your wrath is past, that you would appoint me a set time and remember me. So now he's thinking, my best hope is I can die now. God will now forget about me a bit and give up on all his anger, and then resurrect me from the dead later on at another time, and then we'll get this fixed and sorted out. So if a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my hard service, I will wait till my change comes. And this is part of what people remembered as the patience of Job. You shall call, and I will answer you. You shall desire the work of your hands. But for now you number my steps, but do not watch over my sin. My transgression is sealed up in a bag, and you cover my iniquity. You won't tell me what I've done wrong. So hide me in the grave, let me die, resurrect me from the dead, and then you can tell me what went wrong. Because for right now, all you're basically doing is like verse 19, as the waters wear away stones and as torrents wash away the soil of the earth, so you destroy the hope of man. And Job's basically saying to God that, look at all you've done with me right now is destroy all my hope. Now, one of the things you want to be careful about with Job's friends is that they used Bible principles, but they didn't apply them correctly. And this is a mistake that we can all fall into. And you got to be careful that we don't do this, because we can quote Bible passages and we think we got it figured out, but then we go to apply them into our lives and other people's lives and realize later on in life that, wait a minute, I guess I've been using that wrong all my life. So you look at things like Eliphaz in chapter 5, he catches the wise in their own craftiness. That gets quoted in 1 Corinthians 3. Or Eliphaz in chapter 5, happy is the man with whom God corrects, one we already looked at, that ends up being used in Proverbs 3. But they're used in a different way than these fellows are using them here. Chapter 8, verse 19, Bildad says, God will not cast away the blameless, nor will he uphold evildoers. That's true. He doesn't cast away the blameless, and he won't uphold the evildoers. But they end up saying that what this means, Job, is that if you're blameless, you'll be blessed, and if you're an evildoer, you're going to get punished. And that's the mistake that they made. Zophar, the triumphing of the wicked is short, and the joy of the hypocrite is but for a moment. And, we could say amen to that, because from the perspective of our lives, the triumphing of the wicked is short. But God doesn't always punish them in this life. So we got to be very careful that when we're using Bible principles, that we don't misapply them, especially when we're making accusations against other people. And to be a good, godly counselor, we've got to be willing to listen to people, try to understand where they're coming from, and open to modifying our view and theirs, really, before suggesting a plan of action. We have to be willing to listen and really try to figure this out, not just plan in our own minds what we're going to say as soon as they're done speaking. That's not effective counseling. So in round two, what ends up happening is the three friends just get more desperate. They have no new information at all. All they can do is say the very same things they said before and say, all right, Job, this is about you. You're being punished like a wicked man. All right. They don't mention anything anymore about repenting. They're just accusing Job. You're like, Job, look at what you've done. The reason you're going through this is because of your sins. You've got to admit what you did wrong, Job, and then everything's going to turn out just fine. So that's really basically what goes on in round two. And round three gets even more false accusations and more personal in terms of the development. So I wanted to just look for a moment at, because we don't have time to go through all these things tonight, but when you watch the development of Job through the speeches, it's fun to look at what happens with Job. And if you download the handout that I gave out on that website, you'll see that I went through this all the different speeches Job made and his friends, and looked at how Job starts to learn some things, and he develops. And some is good, some is bad, but he's actually changing his view as you go through this whole procedure. He begins by pleading with his friends to comfort him and help him understand, but he gives up on that. He becomes really disappointed by their comments and says they're miserable comforters. And finally, in the end, he pleads with them to listen and understand what he says about the wicked. It's like, hey guys, you're not listening. You keep saying that the wicked people get punished. And I'm trying to tell you, talk to travelers, look around, and realize the wicked aren't always being punished. And his three friends, they don't even acknowledge that. They won't even come to grips with it at all. So eventually, as this goes on, instead of calling them friends, he actually considers these three guys his enemies. And he loses patience with them for not listening. And that's what happens when we are ineffective counselors and comforters. The people that we're trying to help in the end, they just wish we didn't come. And they don't find us helpful at all, because they should have listened and tried to modify and understand what Job was saying. When you look at how Job develops his understanding about God's dealing with us right now, he originally thought that God punished and blessed us according to our wickedness and righteousness, like these three friends do. What he does, though, he laments that everyone sees his situation as God punishing him for his sins. This bothers Job. It bothers him that everybody's judging him. They're looking at him. And this is true to ecclesial life today. A lot of our brothers and sisters feel this way when some bad tragedy happens to them, and they end up feeling like people are looking at them like, wow, what did they do wrong? And Job is no different. He finally comes to realize that God doesn't usually punish the wicked right now. And that's a major development for Job. But he still couldn't understand how God works. He sort of makes progress in certain areas, but he's got a wall in front of him that he can't see beyond. And in the end, it seems that he finally realizes, when this is all done and over, that God's working to train and save, not punish his children. But he had to give up on this prosperity gospel. Look at his awareness of the resurrection. He initially focused on being justified in this life, not even thinking about the resurrection. But as this goes on and he realizes he's probably going to die, he turns his focus to justification at the resurrection. And eventually he's convinced that he will be resurrected and justified before God. So his focus on the resurrection actually changes as you go through this. And the punishment of the wicked, he begins with the idea that God punishes the wicked in this life according to their sins. Job points out later on, though, that the wicked aren't always published, and even the travelers know that. And he realizes that something God will then punish their children. You wonder, like, how do people justify this idea that God punishes the wicked when you can look around and you can see, well, wait a minute, the wicked aren't being punished. What they did is they thought, well, if God doesn't punish the wicked in this life right now, he'll punish their children. And you think, oh, that's crazy. But you think in the New Testament, remember when they asked Jesus, well, who sinned that this man was born blind, the man or somebody else? They believe this stuff, that God was punishing people for their sins, and if they didn't get you as a parent, he'll get your children or your grandchildren. And finally, in the end, what Job comes to, because he can't understand and he runs into this wall, he finally becomes convinced that God deals with the righteous and the wicked alike. He finally says it's sort of random. God just treats them both the same. He doesn't really treat the wicked and the righteous any different in this life. And that's one of the things that bothered Solomon in Ecclesiastes as well. And Elihu is going to come in and try to explain to Job, wait a minute, you got this all wrong, and try to help him understand how God deals with the wicked and the righteous. So Job 19, though, I want to look at tonight. Look at what Job comes to by the time you get to chapter 19. He's so frustrated with the friends after round 2, and he says, how long will you torment my soul and break me in pieces with words? These 10 times you've reproached me. You are not ashamed that you have wronged me. All these things you're saying to me are terrible. And if indeed I have erred, my error remains with me. What are you doing, like charging me with all these things and coming after me like this? If indeed you exalt yourselves against me and plead my disgrace against me, know then. Now watch this in chapter 19. Know then that God has wronged me and has surrounded me with his net. This is where they pushed Job to. They pushed him and pushed him with this idea to where in the end he has to say, wait a minute, this is wrong. I shouldn't be going through this. I don't deserve this. God must be wrong. God has wronged me. He surrounded me with his net and he's trapped me inside here and he's punished me in a way I don't deserve, because he's still thinking in some way that he's being punished by God. He gets backed into a corner. He knows he hasn't committed these sins that are greater than his friends. So according to their views about suffering, God must be wrong. And Job doesn't consider other reasons for suffering during these. He does consider some, at least, that God is random. But he always comes back to his defense that God is wrong about Job. And nobody in the whole first part of this, none of his three friends, nobody sitting there is able to give Job another reason for his suffering. And when you get to Elihu, you're going to find out this is where Job just like breathed for the first time and realized, wow, that's outside the box. I'd never really thought about that. So be careful when we're talking to people and we're having discussions. Don't back people into a corner. Look what they did to Job. They forced him into a corner where he ended up saying things that were wrong, and he shouldn't have done this. And you can push people to extremes. So Job says, look at in verse 7 of chapter 19, if I cry out concerning wrong, am I not heard? If I cry aloud, there is no justice. Like nobody's listening. God isn't doing anything either. He has fenced up my way so that I cannot pass, and he set darkness in my paths. He stripped me of my glory, taken the crown from my head. He breaks me down on every side, and I'm gone. My hope he has uprooted like a tree. He has also kindled his wrath against me, and he counts me as one of his enemies. Do you see his view of God right now? He thinks God is out to get him. God treats him like an enemy, and he wants to break Job and destroy him. His troops come together and build up their road against me. They encamp all around my tent. Verse 13, he's removed my brothers from me. Verse 14, my relatives have failed. And he blames God for all this. Verse 15, my breath is offensive to my wife. I'm repulsive to the children of my body. Even young children despise me, and I arise and they speak against me. All my close friends abhor me, and those whom I love have turned against me. My bone clings to my skin and to my flesh. I've escaped by the skin of my teeth. And God, it's all your fault. This is the only answer Job has at this point. Nobody has been able to explain to him a different reason. So he appeals to his friends. Have pity on me. Have pity on me. Oh, you, my friends, for the hand of God has struck me. Why do you persecute me as God does and are not satisfied with my flesh? So it's really clear by the time you get to chapter 19 that Job really feels that God has wrongly persecuted him, struck him, made him look terrible in the eyes of everybody else, that God mistakenly is angry at him and is wrongfully persecuting him. Now, spoiler alert, because you got to realize that good Bible exposition is based on context. Context. That's the context of Job 19. That's how he feels about God. And in the midst of that, you get this verse, I know that my Redeemer lives. And unfortunately, now the crazy music that we've got, they applied it the wrong way. The church has applied it the wrong way. Most of Christianity has applied it the wrong way, and it even ended up in our hymn book. But you're going to find out that's not what Job was thinking when he wrote this in Job 19. You look at our hymn book, hymn 394, I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. And we sing that hymn, and we think that Job is thinking about Jesus Christ coming back to declare the righteousness of God and be the Redeemer of Job, and that is so far from Job's mind right now. That is not what Job is thinking. It's a misapplication of the scriptures. So look at what he says. Look at the context. Oh, that my words were written. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book, that they were engraved on a rock with an iron pen and lead forever, so that when he gets resurrected, he can bring up his words, have his defense ready, and show God he's wrong. I know that my Redeemer lives. See, Job believed there would be a Redeemer. He thought probably an angel. Somebody knew his life and realized God was wrong, and he's expecting this Redeemer to stand up for him at the resurrection of the dead and prove to God that Job was innocent and God, you wronged him through his life. And that's the context when he says, I know that my Redeemer lives. He's not thinking about Jesus Christ declaring the righteousness of God. He's thinking about a Redeemer declaring Job is right and God is wrong. And he shall stand at the last on the earth. And after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see for myself. The RSV actually says there, they put in the text, whom I shall see on my side. See, he thinks the Redeemer is going to fix God, show God he's wrong, and now God will move over to Job's side, and in the end, God will be standing there with Job. And my eyes shall behold and not another. Oh, how my heart yearns within me. He can't wait for the day when he is vindicated and God is shown to be wrong. That's where Job is at in Job 19, and it's totally wrong to take those verses out of context. So he goes on in chapter 19 and says, you might say, well, let's keep bothering Job. After all, he's the cause of all his suffering. But you should be afraid when God comes to judge you. He'll be angry. He'll punish you with the sword. Then you will know that he is the judge. And that's what he wants to remind his friends about. So tonight, what I want to at least leave with tonight is to become an effective counselor, brothers and sisters, and young people that are here, to become effective counselors, don't say things about God which aren't true. He doesn't like that. We have to listen to people and try to understand and determine how we can help relieve their burden. Effective comforting involves risks. It does involve risks. Some people in the ecclesia may not agree with you trying to help people because they're judging the other people and they don't necessarily want somebody to get involved and help them. It's a tempting time to think that we're somehow above all those people that we're comforting. And we got to be careful. We want to use the Psalms in a good way because the Psalms are really good at starting out with frustrations and ending up with confidence in God. They're really good at that and helping other people. So, where did I end up with there? Well, in Job 23, just so you can see it doesn't end any different. We'll end up with Job here. This is where Job finally gets to in chapter 23. He says, oh, that I knew that where I might find God, that I might come to his seat. I would present my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. He can't wait to present his case to God. And I would know the words which he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he contend with me in his great power? No, but he would take note of me. He'd listen to me. Where there the upright could reason with him, and I would be delivered forever from my judge. See, this is his current view of God. He wants to be delivered from him. And he's just feeling like in the end, in verse 10 of chapter 23, he knows the way I take, and when he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold. My foot is held fast to his steps. I've kept his way. I've not turned aside. I have not departed from the commandments of his lips. I've treasured the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. Right? Because Job's thinking that he's built up his righteousness, and his righteousness is more important than God's. And unfortunately, Elihu's going to come in and finally just destroy his glass house, and Job is just going to be shocked that he was so inside a box that he couldn't see beyond his box and realize how God was working with him. So we'll leave that for next week. Hopefully you get a chance to look at Elihu.